Anca Trifan, today's guest, runs Trifan Events, an event production company. She also hosts a podcast and is an advocate and mentor to women in the event production industry. She'll also share insights about her superpower, foreseeing and preventing problems. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. Anca, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a thrill to meet you.
I would say exactly the same, Devin. What a pleasure. It's a treat. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You do some amazing work in the world, but I think one of the things that resonated most with me is that you are working in a male-dominated industry and facing some of those challenges and providing a role model for other women who want to develop. Tell me a little bit about your experience uh, as a technical specialist in the AV and event planning world. Tell us what that's like as a woman.
Devin, how much time do we have? Because this is a topic that I'm so passionate about that I might as well just keep going and talking for about, the rest of the day. So I'm going to have to put some boundaries around this. But just to give a little bit of a background to my audience, how did I end up here? Because it's not necessarily a field that women just, end up in or just somehow fall into. I started actually in radio as a high schooler and then into college. I was really, I had the opportunity to work in a radio station. And I started, in the beginning, just being a personal assistant and then having my own shows. But one thing that actually has turned things around has been when I moved to US right after college, and I realized, well, I can't really do radio because at the time I was super insecure about my accent, and I figured also, I didn't think about podcasting that early, right? I mean, we're talking about almost 20 years ago. Should have. Imagine how big the show, my own show, I have a podcast of my own, would have been
Yeah.
if I did that, right?
Right,
So
right.
the next best thing was, well, what was another thing that actually I was, really passionate about? And I remember falling in love with this little, literally there's a mixer, that all radio stations have that you run sound through to control your levels and EQ your voice. And it was this little Mackie 1204, super, 4 channels, something super small and minimal, But I really liked that. I was literally on the show while I was DJing, changing my EQ on the fly and then just changing my voice all the time. And people are like, what's happening? Why does she sound this or that? And I was like, well, that is something that I enjoyed. How about I look into, pursuing that? So I started, super long story short, working at a production house in LA, and then going to school in the evenings to learn more about sound engineering and then video production and lighting design. And I started really from the ground up. When I first got that job for at a production house, they hired me to fix their computers, not to be, a sound engineer or whatever else I was going to end up to be, So I just, I got the opportunity, put my foot in the door and got in there. And I'm like, I'm going to learn everything there is to learn. And I was hungry. I was super hungry to learn. And I was hanging out with a bunch of guys and just, stealing the craft, technically, right? But I was very passionate about it. So as I was raising myself in this field that is very much, I mean, even to this day, probably 90% male dominated as an industry, I realized that I'm the only girl on the crew, all the time. You look at, some major events, big events that you go to, as an attendee. If you look back in the back of house where, the AV techs are, you probably see only guys. I mean, very rarely do you see women in those positions. So I was always one of those, one girl and then a bunch of guys. And as I got more specialized and I got more training and more experience, to the point where now I walk in with a crew of so many 20 guys, and I am the the only girl, as much as I can now, I actually make it an intentional effort to bring in women in tech role positions. But many times it happens that, okay, this is my crew, this is my production house that I work with, and this is what they send me. And I'm like, yeah, it's me again. Here we go. So it's been quite an experience. One of the things that I felt like I was missing the most is having some type of a role model, a female role model. I never had that. I've had many great male role models in this field, and many of which actually have, helped me get where I am, have taught me a great deal of things that, technical knowledge that I've gained from them. But I've never had a woman to also bring a little bit of the women touch, and feel to this role that now, I was feeling. So as I was looking at that, and just in my mind, feeling a little bit like shorthanded, because I'm like, man, I feel like I could have gained so much more from having. It's almost like if you were to make the comparison between, when you have two parents raising a child versus one parent raising the same child, like regardless if it's the mom or the dad raising the child, that child is kind of getting only one-sided experience from this wholeness of what parenting should be like, right? So I kind of felt like I only got one-sided of like what this role that now I'm walking in and I'm building my business upon is, because I've only had, the the male mentorship versus a female mentorship. So with that in mind, now so many years into my career and into building my business, I really started being very intentional and way more intentional in how can I elevate other women to be raising them in this field? How can I give them a seat at the table? How can I make them feel like they belong? Belonging has been one of those challenges that I've struggled with the most, because in many cases, well, first as an immigrant, you've got the belonging to begin with, right? But then as a female in a male dominated field, you also have a little bit of like belonging, non-belonging type of issue going on, and having to resolve that. How do I belong when, a lot of the things that I hear around me, a lot of the conversations, the language is not necessarily, what I'm used to, right? So a lot of those things have been, I've struggled with. I've made my own mistakes, I've had my own challenges, and I'm like, how good would have been if there was like a blueprint, or if there's a manual, something that I could have read beforehand and be like, okay, by the way, when you get to page 77, and you have to deal with, I don't know, sexual harassment, this is what you should be doing. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see when that comes about how I'm going to handle that. So a lot of the things that I wish I knew, or I wish I could ask someone about, I had to leave them and then learn from them. If there were, mistakes, try not to repeat them, and just, grow wiser. I feel like now in the present, COVID has really brought up this, has opened up the horizon, first off, to find more female in technology type of roles, especially as event specialists, especially with all the virtual events that we've been doing for the last two, and now I don't know, half years, I don't know, who knows anymore. But a lot of those relationships now that I've built are with very strong women that have raised themselves up, because they come from like an event planning background, and they had to switch roles, they had to pivot, they had to learn technology at a level that before they were never forced to. But because they had to survive somehow, one way or another, right, in their position, short of like, changing careers altogether, they embraced this new wave of technology, figuring things out. Of like, I have friends that are now, virtual event producers. They're like, 2 years ago, I didn't even know that a microphone had multiple, type of endings. Like you could be a USB or you could be an XLR plug-in microphone. Like what is that? Like simple things that you didn't have to know because you were relying always on a maybe AV production house to provide supply and provide for your event. So it's been, I think, there is a little bit of silver lining when it comes to the pandemic and all the things that we've gone through. And for me, one of those silver linings has been being able to actually really connect, because I had to get myself out of my comfort zone and now reach out and connect with a lot of other women on the other side and be like, wow, there's actually more of us. Oh, I can't believe that you do this too. Even though, to be honest, someone like me in my role as in-person event productions of almost like 20 years now, switching to virtual and now back to hybrid, it's rare to find that role so well defined. But connecting with women that do, that's when I feel like, oh my gosh, there's a tribe. And now I am so grateful to have found this tribe and not feel like, well, I'm not a guy, and I'm not a guy on a tech crew per se, because I'm not a guy, period. But I'm also not like a girly girl that goes shopping all day long, because that's not what I'm passionate about either. So I would always be like kind of like the in between. I'm like, not this, not that. Like, what am I then? So finding my place has been definitely soul searching, almost like to fit somewhere where I can contribute, and I can leave my mark in the world, I suppose.
Yeah. As I listen to you, I can't help but get just a little hung up on your very passing, glancing reference to sexual harassment, and and being in such a male-dominated place. I've got to think that that was more than a passing, glancing experience. I don't want you to share anything you don't want to share, but I would really love you to just expound on that just a little bit, because I think, you know, guys can't hear it too much.
Mhm.
We need constant education. Guys are generally the culprits, and
Yeah.
we need more sensitivity training. So help us understand your experiences to the extent you feel comfortable sharing.
And I think that is such a great topic to bring to the forefront, even though, it can be uncomfortable. I mean, it can be uncomfortable on both ends, on the female side and on the male side. And I'm not saying that there's not females that have harassed guys, there's that happens all the time as well. I think in this kind of, this particular example where the balance is definitely leaning more like there's more males versus females in this industry, it tends to be that where the victim is usually the female in most cases, just because of the balance how things are. I personally have only dealt with it at, I would say, a light level version of, like, I try to have my boundaries set pretty well from the beginning. Even though I'm a banterer, I love to joke. I love to have fun and just be light and funny. But at the
Hmm.
same time, there is boundaries that shall not be crossed, especially when it comes to professional relationships. And when you're working, in a professional setup, it can be easy to cross those boundaries, very easy, especially you happen to work with guys all the time. Now there has to be some type of respect, both self-respect and respect of the other person. And when there some of that is not, that's when things get murky and things get confusing and things get dangerous. And I actually, as because of my podcast and the fact that I raised this question, I raised this challenge that women face in the industry, I get to hear stories. Like, some of them are really traumatic stories and heartbreaking stories of women that have not necessarily had the same experience in which I was able to protect myself, not because I'm a big girl and I can just throw punches, but just by the set of circumstances that I did not put myself in places and situations where I felt like I was uncomfortable. And every time that it came about, I needed to figure out a way, a strategy, and an exit. So it was kind of like always in the back of my mind. Like there was like some one time, just like a small example where, like, what is my exit strategy here? We had an event, and there were like common showers, and I mean, I haven't showered for like a few days. I gotta go and shower now, but it's like common showers, like everybody goes and showers because they're all made for male showers. So
Right.
I'm finding the time of day when I'm thinking, okay, nobody's gonna take a shower right now, so I'm gonna sneak in, get a shower really fast, and like sneak out. But as I'm doing this, like I get, people walking in on me, and I'm like, there you go. This is a very dangerous situation where, like, I don't know this person. They can walk on me at any moment. What's my exit strategy here, right? So having that thought constantly, like, what's my next step? That has always been my strategy. And it kind of speaks to like, but why do you have to have that? Like, why can't you feel like safe and, everything, is rosy and unicorns and beauty? Because when you're in those type of situations and circumstances, you do have to have some type of a plan. Like, okay, what do I do if this happens? Or what do I do if, and we're not just talking about like, okay, I'm walking, at the tech table, and a guy just happens to have their hand around where my bum is. I'm like, how did your hand get there? Like, come on, let's talk about this. I also happen to be very outspoken, and I'm not afraid to point things out, unfortunately, like right then and there and out loud. And that puts people, uncomfortably in like that awkward situation, or like, okay, well, I don't want to hear from her, so I better like keep my hands to myself because I'm sure I'm going to hear it out and loud, So, um, again, it takes some strategy, it takes some planning, it takes some avoiding certain circumstances, or avoiding even like, okay, this was a great event. Now we're going out for drinks afterwards. How many drinks can I have before I know for sure that I'm not going to be in control of myself? And then I go back from there. Okay, so I can have a drink and a half. Then don't go post that. Because then I
Yeah.
know if I hit that second drink and then that turns into a third, then I am not no longer in control of what could happen to me, where I'm not as vigilant anymore, right? And and again, like I think only happened in one time in my life where that situation where, like, you work with some really handsome guys. I mean, come on, I like guys, okay? And things can go murky from actually a consent point of view too. Like, hey, we're both like, we're kind of like, flirting with each other, and we're kind of, this could go somewhere. Thinking what's gonna happen post that. Okay, so if that happens, if we end up, like, let's say it out loud, like sleeping together, how am I going to work with you tomorrow? Or how am I going to work with you a week or a month, or, a year from now if things don't work out? And if
Yeah.
you can answer that question in a way that you are both, able to say, hey, we're adults, we can deal with this, we'll figure it out. I don't know if that's the best strategy. You'll have to figure it out before that actually happens, because post that, a lot of things can happen in ways that, you could lose job opportunities, you could lose friendships, you could ruffle, feathers left and right in other situations. You could lose, your next proposal, job, whatever position, right? So those are all things that, let's be honest, guys talk like a lot, just like girls do. And as a female, you also don't want to have the reputation that you're someone that, oh, you got there because you slept your way through it. That's one thing that, as a female in a male dominated world, has been one of like first thing in my mind. Like, I don't want to give anyone any excuse to question my ability or why am I here in the first place. Because the moment that gets super gray, um, it's going to be a disadvantage to the female in all cases.
Yeah. Boy, those are some meaty topics. We could spend all day on
I
this, but
know, right?
I want to move on to another topic briefly. As the professional you are, I bet you've got some great advice for people who are planning cause oriented, purpose oriented, maybe nonprofit events, what would you suggest that you've learned over your tenure in this world that others could apply?
I think, again, COVID has changed the um, game playbook in such a major way, and so big in ways that we haven't necessarily considered before. So one of the bigger things that I would have a conversation with my clients as they're embarking onto this journey of um, planning their next event is one, especially for a nonprofit, knowing that nonprofits in general they struggle with budget, and you can't just allocate a huge amount of money towards something that is not going to give you a return on your investment. So one of the first question that I challenge my clients to ask themselves is, why do you have to have this event in the first place? And then if you have solid grounds, then we can look into, okay, so then let's look into the strategy and the formatting of what this event might look like. And this is where having the 2 years and something now of virtual events as a new format for some of those nonprofits to be able to still fundraise. And I've had some excellent results with nonprofits fundraising virtually in a digital format, especially in 2020 when that was the only thing that we could do. I've had clients that have raised over $2 million just in one setting, in one event, 1 hour. But the work that has to be put into that also has to be considered. Like, it's not that easy to do that anymore, because getting those eyes on screen takes a little bit of work, and it's not just the planning, but it's also the marketing, and it's the content, and it's all those things that work together to make sure that you capture people's attention and they open their wallets in the process, because you really touch them even through the means of a screen. And now that we have the ability to implement both the digital event and the in-person, which is what we call hybrid, but really going forward, this is going to be the events of the future. So they're just going to be called events. They're not going to be hybrid or virtual, just going to be events. And they're all going to have basically some type of virtual component, because you want to take advantage of the reach that virtual has provided. And especially if you had events that were virtually in 2020 and 2021, don't discount the reach that you've built. And I've had events that they have reached people in places and countries outside of their sphere of influence, on the other side of the world, an audience that they didn't even know they had. And they were surprised to realize that there's actually people that care about my cause, and they're in Dubai, or they're in, I don't know, South Argentina, or South America in Argentina, places like that. Otherwise it'd be like, no, we're just thinking about our zip code when we put an in-person event, and maybe a little bit outside of that, right? But
Yeah.
now, like, you have the whole globe could be your audience if you market that event well, and your cause is something that really touches the heart of more than just your community. So there's still a lot of opportunity for nonprofits to fundraise in so many different ways now that we have the ability to do that, and we have tested the waters, and we have tested the technology, and we have really made it happen. I have this week, actually, as we speak, I'm not sure if it's going to be the same week as the podcast releases, but in the
Yeah.
present moment, as we speak, I'm working with a nonprofit from on the East Coast, and I'm based in Boise, Idaho, like in the middle of, not the country, not on the East Coast. And they had the opportunity to go back to in person, and they've chosen not to, because their in person 2019 event was okay. They fundraised, I don't know, like $50,000. But then their 2020 virtual event was fantastic. And their 2021 event virtually as well was fantastic. So they're like, why would you want to go back to in person when we've raised so much funds just by putting on a virtual event? Yes, there is some cost involved, because virtual events, just because they're virtual, they're not free. And especially if you want to have an elevated production value assigned to them. So even though there's a cost associated with that. It was nowhere close to what they were paying if they had to have a venue, if they had to have, food and beverage and all the other things that go with having an in-person event. So it all goes to say the fact that as an organization, you have options and you have to ask the right questions and then make the decision based on actual facts. We had analytics that we were able to pull from those virtual events that now we can tell, okay, so we've had so many people that dropped in and they watched this much of the event and they sticked around for this long and they donated this much. All of this is data that before with in-person events we didn't necessarily have, right? So now we can adjust our programming, we can adjust our content, and we can adjust the length of the event to really make this event the best event possible that it can be in the time assigned for the audience that we're working with.
Yeah, that's really valuable insights there. So thank you very much, Anka. Uh, Anka, what is your superpower?
I feel like I have a keen sense of knowing when things are about to go bad or go wrong, and I am one step ahead of that, as well as with, I think that goes hand in hand with my attention to details. I always have brought like my attention to details to the table full on. Some people call it OCDness, I don't know, I take it as a as a benefit, because there's certain things that I pay attention to and I know I'm the only one that sees them, and that's okay because that's what helps me to foresee things that could happen one way or another or not happen, or start unshoveling and things starting going a little left instead of just straight. And that gives me the ability to then be proactive of what the next steps are to be for whatever the event, the situation, the whatever technical situation we're in, not to go that way. So yeah, I don't know if that's a
Yeah.
name for it. Like, what would you call that, Devin? Like,
Uh, Obviously, you have an ability to foresee what's going on, which is to foresee problems and then, of course, take action. That's a super powerful
that is a superpower.
superpower. Yeah, that's
Yep.
a great superpower. Let Can you think of an example of when you used that in your professional career successfully?
I'm trying to pinpoint something that that was gonna go really south. Mm-mm. Okay, I'll come up with this hybrid event example. It was a conference, a 2-day conference, and here locally, but it was also streaming to about 1,000 virtual attendees. And I was working with a production house locally here, and we had the plan set up. Everything, I mean, everything was rolling as it should be up until probably, I think, on the Wednesday. It was on a Wednesday, and the event was set to set up on a Monday, the next Monday, and go live on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So on Wednesday, I'm having this conversation again with my team, and I'm starting to hear a little bit of, I don't know, just like hesitant answers. Something is not right, and I'm like, first, like my ears perk up, and I'm like, I need to dig deeper into this, like what's happening, right? And to find out from the business owner of this production house that I was dealing with, that he had a major split in the company just that week, and half of his labor basically departed. And this is the person, the company that I've assigned for my event. And I'm thinking now, oh, shoot, if half of your labor has departed, that means there's going to be a few people missing on my crew when we're going to go and set up on Monday. So I'm trying to, investigate and find out a little bit more, like, what exactly what's happening? Like, how sure are we that we can actually move on with the plan? And he's, not able to give me straight answers. And he's just like, maybe, but possibly, let me think about it, let me get back to you, kind of answers. And you're like already thinking, oh, this is not good, like red flags left and right. So I'm at that point, I'm like, okay, get off the phone, and I'm like, I need to set up a B plan, like a B crew, because this, in case doesn't happen, I can be letting my client down. So I'm starting to making calls to have my backup people align. I mean, I know I need a live streamer. I need someone to run sound. I need someone to run a video. I need someone to be switching graphics. I need someone to be on camera. Actually, a couple of guys on cameras. I need a stage manager. I mean, there's a few roles, roles that I need to fill
Yeah.
for that conference, and it's not just like a 3 hour event and then we're good. It's like 2 days worth of conference, which is very long to, have to hire
Yeah.
someone during the busy season, which, for events, usually that's spring and fall. This was in the spring. And I'm making calls, and I'm like, okay, if I don't have to use you, that's okay. But if I need to give you a call like Monday morning, will you please let me know if you can make it, if you can commit to this time? And it's hard, honestly, when you have to make people commit to something like that, because if something else comes up, they will take that opportunity first, right? Because right now I'm just promising them a 2 day event and pay for something that I'm not yet sure, if it's going to happen or not, based on like what my situation is here. So I'm pulling a lot of favors. And lo and behold, Monday morning, 8 a.m. comes, and my company calls me, the one that I've hired initially. Oh, I've only got 2 guys coming, and we need to find another like 5 guys. And at that point, I'm like, you know what? Don't worry about it. I've got the people. And I was able to call my contacts and then get people in. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't easy. I still had to do a lot of training on the fly over the com, from my position, the as with the client as the technical director, and just talking to my guy that was running lights and my audio engineer that was not so sure about how they're going to route signal to the live streaming versus the in person, because he's never done that before. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. So there are situations like that where you need to be able to kind of like look at your crystal ball, as broken as it might be at times, and figure out, okay, which way will this take, which turn it will take, because I need to be prepared for whatever. That's what in events we call contingency planning. Like, what's your contingency? What's your what are you going to do, if this fails? Like, what's plan B, what's plan C, what's plan D? And nothing has brought that need for multiple plans as backups than COVID. And especially with for events that were booked in venues, and then having to cancel their venue, and try to figure out, okay, are we going to do something virtually? And then how about we go back to the venue? Oh, the venue doesn't have the date anymore. Let's go back to the virtual. Oh, now the production house doesn't have the date. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild stuff. Wild stuff. Well, listen, Anka, we just have a minute left, respecting your time. What would you counsel someone to do to develop this sense of foresight? Is there something you can help us learn so that we can develop this strength as well?
That's a fantastic question, and if it was an easy answer, I would give it to you. But my only particular in my situation answer is experience. Honestly, you might have to put yourself in situations that are not always rosy, and learn some of those mistakes in ways that are not necessarily happy, and be able to rise back up. So I feel like the foresight also comes with that resilience to keep going, and to be able to be open-minded, to learn from your mistakes, learn from whatever failures that might have happened in the past, and get better at doing the one thing that maybe just the universe keeps bringing in front of you. Hey, you gotta repeat this lesson until you really learn it. And that will definitely give you the foresight next time you're in that situation. Like, this sounds a lot like that one time when this happened. What can I do to change the outcome?
Yeah. That's a fantastic observation. Well, Anca, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Before we wrap up, will you take just a minute and tell people how they can learn more about Trifon events, how they can learn more about events demystified, your podcast, and how they can connect with you on social media or otherwise?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. The best way to connect with me professionally is on LinkedIn. And if you'll have that in the episode notes, that would be fantastic. My name is spelled ANCA Trifan. So that's Anca Trifan. My business name is Trifan, which is spelled TREEFAN event. And it's just a play on my last name, honestly, because most people, they would pronounce my name as Trifan. But in Romanian, because that's what that's where I was born and raised, we say my last name as Trifan. So all that to say, Trifan Events, TREEFAN events.com is the website. There's also a website for the podcast, eventsdemystified.com. And if none of those stick, I would say just go to LinkedIn, look me up, hit me up with whatever questions you might have. I am an open book. I love to talk to people and give them advice in the, the means, in the expertise that I have. And always happy to make new connections.
Oh, fantastic. Anca, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in your work, and thank you for the great role model that you are for women in a male-dominated industry. So kudos and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
All righty. Let's do some good. Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devinthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.